엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Coming up on Arirang News, more than 40 people have been killed across South Korea after days of torrential downpours. Search operations are underway in Osong, Chungcheongbuk-do Province, where the death toll reaches more than a dozen from a flooded underground roadway. President Yoon calls to mobilize all means to recover the damage from the rain as soon as possible, including the declaration of special disaster zones for regions hit hard. Russia blames Ukraine for an attack on a Crimean bridge that connects the Crimean Peninsula to Russia. The Kremlin halts participation in the Black Sea grain deal, which allowed safe grain export from Ukraine despite the war. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with the aftermath of the monsoon rain that had battered the country over the weekend and caused flash flooding and casualties. One more body has been recovered from the flooded underground in Osong, with the death toll rising to at least 14. Our reporter Song Yoo-jin leads us off.
This year's monsoon season has been catastrophic. Heavy rain pounded the nation over the weekend, taking lives and damaging infrastructure. One of the hardest hit areas, Osong in Cheongju City, Chungcheongbuk-do Province.
So what you see behind me right now is a Chungcheong-to underpass tunnel that flooded on Saturday morning, where 13 people lost their lives and 9 were more injured. Now, the 685-meter-long tunnel was completely submerged on Saturday morning after floodwater from a nearby river rushed into it.
Just seconds after I drove into the underpass, my car was completely submerged. When I drove out of the tunnel, it was already beneath the floodwater.
The number of deaths could rise as authorities say there could be more people trapped inside than have been reported missing to the police, which is 12. Search and rescue efforts have been ongoing since Saturday, with firefighters and soldiers pumping floodwater out of the underpass. As of Monday evening, they've pulled 17 vehicles out from inside the tunnel. Nationwide, 40 people have died and 9 remain missing due to the torrential rain this year. This is the highest figure recorded in 12 years, and this year's monsoon season is not over yet. In addition, 34 people have been injured, while over 10,000 have evacuated their homes for safety. 19 deaths were recorded in the mountainous Gyeongsangbuk-do Province, mostly caused by landslides, 16 in Chungcheongbuk-do Province, 4 in Chungcheongnam-do Province, and 1 in neighboring Sejong City. And in the coming days, we're bracing for heavy rain. The Korea Meteorological Administration expects around 100 to 200 millimeters of rain to fall on Chungcheongdo, Gyeongsangdo, Jeollado provinces and Jeju Island into Wednesday morning. The central region, including Seoul, Incheon City, and northern Gyeonggi-do Province, will experience less rainfall, between 10 to 60 millimeters. That's why the KMA is seeing Thursday and Friday, after the rain subsides, as the optimal time for rescue and recovery efforts. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News, Cheongju.
President Yoon urged all possible resources to be mobilized for recovery from the rain damage. He ordered to declare special disaster zones for hard-hit regions to free up more government funds. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
As soon as he returned home from his week-long overseas trip, President Yoon Suk-yeol on Monday chaired a Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters meeting and called for regions hit especially hard by the monsoon rain to be classed as special disaster zones.
복구 작업과 재난 피해에 대한 지원 역시 신속하게 이루어져야 하고, 특별 재난 지역 선포 등 정책 수단을 모두 동원하여 후속 조치를 신속하게 추진해 주기 바랍니다.
If a region is designated as a special disaster zone, the central government guarantees financial support for its recovery efforts. Yoon, meanwhile, said all possible resources have to be mobilized, including the military and the police. This is his second monsoon season since taking office, and he experienced serious rain-related incidents last year. As the president, he showed his discontent with the disaster response, saying areas exposed to such dangers were not managed well before the rainfall.
위험 지역에 대한 진입 통제와 또 위험 지역으로부터의 선제적 대피를 작년부터 거듭 강조하고 있습니다마는 현장에서 재난 대응의 기본 원칙이 지켜지지 않는다면 국민의 안전을 확보하기 어렵습니다.
As the nation is expecting more heavy rain in the next few days, Yoon called for the authorities to take on the situation with extraordinary alertness. He also added that the mindset of disaster prevention has to be completely reset as climate change has made heavy rainfall to be routine. Following the meeting, he took time to visit Yecheon of Chungcheongbuk-do Province, where a landslide took at least 9 lives and as of Monday afternoon, around 10 are still missing. He was briefed by the county chief and took time to visit a temporary shelter for those who had their homes submerged by mud and rocks.
식사 좀 잘 하시면서 정부에서 다 복구해드리고 다 할 테니까 너무 걱정하지 마십시오. 네.
In the meantime, the spokesperson for the top office said in a written statement that during the disaster response meeting, President Yoon called for public servants working in safety to go out there and see for themselves and what should be done, especially considering that rain is expected to continue for the next few days as well. 김도현, Arirang News.
Leaders from the country's rival political parties are visiting regions affected by the extreme monsoon downpours, delivering messages of sympathy and consolation. The ruling People Power Party leader Kim Ki-hyun headed to Chungcheongbuk-do Province to view regions flooded by the torrential rain. Previously on Sunday, the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea leader Lee Jae-myung visited Chungcheongbuk-do Province, where more than 1,000 residents had been evacuated. The rival parties both called for quick recovery efforts and support for the victims, as well as measures to prevent future weather-related disasters. Meanwhile, many National Assembly standing committees had their scheduled meeting either postponed or canceled. The South Korean president is now back home, having wrapped up his trip to Europe that included a surprise stopover in Ukraine, aligning with like-minded partners. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji explains more on what this trip means.
After wrapping up his 8-day-long trip to Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine, President Yoon arrived in Seoul at about 5:30 a.m. on Friday morning. During his visit to Ukraine over the weekend, the president promised that South Korea will provide more non-lethal military supplies and over $200 million of humanitarian assistance and financial aid to rebuild the war-torn country. Traveling a total of 27 hours by road and rail to reach Ukraine from Poland, Yoon became the first South Korean leader to visit a nation at war.
대한민국은 우크라이나의 자유와 평화, 번영을 가꾸는 동반자가 될 것이며 나아가 우크라이나와 함께 세계의 자유, 평화, 번영에 함께 기여하는 믿음직한 파트너가 될 것입니다. 그 희망찬 미래를 향해 저와 젤렌스키 대통령은 더욱 긴밀히 소통하고 협력해 나아갈 것입니다.
While holding talks with the Ukrainian leader, Yoon pledged to expand supplies of critical equipment for Ukrainian forces and support recovery and counseling for children traumatized and violated by the ongoing war.
Specifically, we can happily conclude that an agreement on the transfer of specialized vehicles and technical equipment, including for demining, is already being implemented. This helps us preserve human lives. Thank you, Mr. President, for new initiatives on financial, technical, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine.
President Yoon declared a new aid package to expand Seoul's military, humanitarian, and reconstruction assistance. In terms of humanitarian aid, Seoul plans to increase its annual contribution this year by 30% on year to $150 million. Yoon also noted that around $100 million has been allocated for long-term low-interest loans in a bilateral MOU to fund Ukraine's various reconstruction projects. Meanwhile, pundits say the surprise visit to Ukraine could be part of South Korea's efforts to strengthen security cooperation with the U.S. and Japan ahead of their trilateral summit that could possibly take place next month in Washington.
By strengthening trilateral ties between South Korea, U.S. and Japan, the Yoon administration's diplomacy has been focused on playing its role as a global pivotal state within the international community. While doing that, it has also been strengthening cooperation with NATO.
Leaders of all three countries have now visited Ukraine. Before stopping by Kyiv, President Yoon visited Lithuania, where he attended the meeting of NATO country leaders that was extended to invited nations. Addressing world leaders, he called for stronger condemnation in response to North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. Then in Poland, Yoon held a summit with his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda, and established a three-way system with Ukraine to support its post-war reconstruction efforts. Peunji, Arirang News.
The key Crimean Bridge linking the annexed peninsula to Russia was reportedly hit by two strikes early Monday, and 2 people have been reported dead in the incident. Russia points fingers at Ukraine. Jung has the latest.
The Crimean Bridge, a key supply line for Russian troops in Ukraine between the annexed Crimean Peninsula and Russia, was damaged in an emergency situation early Monday. A Russian regional governor said 2 people were killed and their daughter was seriously injured due to the blasts. Russia's Gray Zone channel, a Telegram channel affiliated with the Wagner mercenary group, reported there were 2 strikes on the bridge at 3:04 a.m. and 3:20 a.m. Sergei Aksionov, the Russia-appointed head of Crimea, said the emergency occurred on the 145th pillar of the bridge. Russia's transport ministry said Monday that the bridge was being inspected by officials. Russian state-run news agencies reported that rail traffic on the bridge was not disrupted and is continuing to operate, although with some delays. In recent weeks, traffic jams to the entrance of the bridge went for kilometers on a daily basis as Russians went on holiday to Crimea. A Moscow-appointed official in occupied Crimea blamed Ukraine for an attack on the bridge, while Russia's state media said on Monday that unmanned drones were used for the strikes. Kyiv has not claimed any direct responsibility. Ukraine has long stated its goal of recapturing Crimea, but rarely comments directly on actions in the peninsula. Russia blamed Ukraine for an attack on the bridge last October, to which Ukraine admitted only indirectly to the attack months later. The nearly 12-mile structure, also known as the Kerch Bridge, is the longest in Europe and carries both road and rail traffic. A spokesperson for Ukraine's defense intelligence said Monday the destruction of part of the Crimean Bridge could create logistical difficulties for Russian forces. George Barras, an analyst at the Washington-based Institute for the Study of War, also said on Twitter that if the bridge was seriously damaged, it would significantly impact Russian supply lines. Monday is also the day on which a crucial deal that allows Ukraine to safely export grain expires. The Kremlin has voiced displeasure with the pact. 정은주, Arirang News.
Russia has suspended its participation in the Black Sea grain deal, which allowed the safe export of Ukrainian grain by sea despite the Russia-Ukraine war. According to Russian state news agency TASS on Monday, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that the agreement will expire by the end of the day. The deal was brokered by the UN in July 2022 to stabilize global food prices as it allowed Ukraine to ship millions of tons of grains through the Black Sea that had been blockaded by Russia's naval vessels. Russia, however, said that the deal favors Ukraine and that it'll not extend it until its conditions that would improve its own grain and fertilizer exports are met. North Korea has reiterated its stance that it cannot denuclearize. The North Korean leader's sister Kim Yo-jong said in a speech published by the state-run Korean Central News Agency on Monday that the U.S. efforts to strengthen its extended deterrence and military commitment to South Korea will make it impossible for North Korea to denuclearize. This comes just a day before South Korea and the U.S. are slated to hold the first meeting of the Nuclear Consultative Group at the Yongsan Presidential Office. The meeting, first announced at the bilateral summit in Washington in April, will discuss consultation and information sharing that will strengthen nuclear deterrence against Pyongyang. And earlier this morning, the National Assembly marked the 75th anniversary of the proclamation of the South Korean Constitution on July 17, 1948. Speaker Kim Jin-pyo called on lawmakers across the aisle to refrain from politics that fuel conflict and instead promote politics that celebrate the constitutional spirit that brought the country together. Kim also pledged to push for amendments to better reflect the current needs of the society. Findings for the first half of this year show global demand for eco-friendly cars made in Korea has led to a record high in the country's auto exports. Our Moon Hae-ryun has the trade numbers.
South Korea's auto industry recorded an exports boom for the first half of the year, hitting an all-time high on the back of the rising popularity of eco-friendly vehicles. Data from the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Monday showed that the total value of auto exports amounted to $35.7 billion for the January to June period this year. This is the highest related figure ever recorded, beating the previous record of $25.2 billion set in 2014. And combined with the value of outbound auto parts, the total surpassed $47 billion. Meaning that the country is well on track to meet its $80 billion goal for the end of this year. The ministry attributed this to the rising popularity of so-called eco-friendly vehicles such as electric and hybrid cars, which saw more than a 70% rise in total export value compared to the same period last year. 385,000 of these cars were sold, meaning that around a quarter of all outbound cars were in the eco-friendly category. June alone saw the second highest export value of green cars in history and marked the fifth consecutive month in which sales exceeded the $2 billion mark. The popularity of electric vehicles was seen most prominently in the United States and in Europe, with the Hyundai Motors Ioniq 5 and 6 electric vehicles selling out at record rates. Last week, the firm reported that sales in the UK had reached the highest level since 2018. Car production was also restored to 2019's pre-COVID-19 capacity, along with a supply of chips and various parts. More than 2 million units were produced during the first half of the year. Meanwhile, auto sales within South Korea were up by around 10% compared to the same period last year. 894,000 cars were sold, with the vast majority of those being domestically produced cars. South Korea has seen a rising preference for cars from domestic firms over foreign imports, with domestic car sales rising by over 8% on year, while foreign car sales fell by over 3%. Eco-friendly cars accounted for just under a third of total sales, and hybrid cars were the most popular, selling over 177,000 units and making up nearly 67% of total eco-friendly car sales. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Household debt in South Korea is rising at an alarming level. In fact, the central bank says it's the third highest among major economies. Our economic correspondent Shin Ha-young explains what should be done to lower the financial stability risk.
As of last year, the household debt-to-GDP ratio in South Korea was 105%. Among 43 major economies, this was the third largest after Switzerland and Australia, the Bank of Korea said on Monday. The BOK pointed out that the high profitability and stability of household loans, as well as insufficient regulations on them, as the causes of the increase in such debt. Financial institutions have been providing a relatively large amount in these loans compared to corporate ones, as they have lower default rates and higher profitability. According to the BOK, the impact of the increased household debt on financial stability has been limited due to the large proportion of high net income borrowers. But there are rising concerns that over the longer term, it could hinder economic growth and widen asset inequality.
The financial sector can become very weak because if the economy slows down and many of these families can no longer pay back the debt, then some financial institutions may become insolvent.
To reduce household debt, the bank said it was necessary to use macroeconomics and monetary policies that are especially focused on financial stability. It also suggested revising current loan regulations, such as minimizing exceptions to the debt service ratio or DSR.
DSR was effective in limiting the growth of household debt. It wasn't completely successful in reducing household debt, but combination of increasing interest rates and DSR ratio probably did much to keep household debt growth in check. Now, if the government loosens up the DSR regulations and households take more loans, then there is a possibility that households will take much more loans than they can afford.
According to data from the Bank of International Settlements, Seoul's DSR was 13.6% last year. This is the second highest among 17 major economies after Australia, indicating a greater debt repayment burden compared to income. 신하영, Arirang News.
China's economy grew slower than expected in the second quarter amid fading post-COVID recovery momentum. Data from China's National Bureau of Statistics revealed on Monday that the country's economy grew 6.3% from April to June compared to a year earlier. This fell below the market expectations of a group of economists polled by Reuters of 7.3%. Market watchers say the recorded growth, which is because of the low base effect, is losing steam, with retail sales rising by a little over 3% in June, the slowest growth since last December. Also, another sign of the nation's faltering recovery was youth unemployment, once again hitting an all-time high of 21.3% in June, up from 20.8% in May. South Korean K-pop girl group Blackpink has set yet another historic record on YouTube. The band's label YG Entertainment announced on Monday that the number of subscribers on Blackpink's official YouTube channel has exceeded 90 million, the most in the world. The milestone was reached 7 years and a month after the channel was launched, and also comes just about a year after the group hit a record of 80 million subscribers last September. BTS followed in second with over 75 million, and Justin Bieber third with over 71 million.
The monsoonal rain front will continue to drop heavy downpours across the south. Extreme downpours are in store for mountainous regions of Jeju Island, with up to 500 millimeters in the forecast. The south coast will see up to 400. Parts of the East Metropolitan area will see around 30 to 100 millimeters. Locally heavy downpours will slam parts of central regions until tomorrow morning. For Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces, 30 to 60 millimeters per hour will batter the region. For Jeju Island, 30 to 80 millimeters per hour are expected for the entire day. The ground is already very weak and saturated due to continuous downpours. This will increase the risk of landslides and flooding, so please take extra precautions beforehand. Under rainy spells, Seoul and Daejeon will be starting off at 23 degrees Celsius. Highs in Seoul get up to 29, Gwangju 28, Daegu and Gyeongju will be reaching 27 degrees. Jeju Island will see showers for the remainder of the week. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for this Monday night newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest news. Hope everyone has a great start of the week.
Welcome.